Mr. Tenet, we're here, of course, because of a massive intelligence failure. But you point out at the very beginning of your testimony that that there were other challenges facing the United States. And you list four: China, Taiwan, North Korea, India, Pakistan, and the Balkans. In those cases, just for balance here, do you believe that you supplied your two presidents with accurate enough and complete enough intelligence so that they were enabled to make wise policy decisions in those four arenas?
In each case, I would tell you, for example, the Balkan crisis obviously was a different crisis because you were supporting military operations. You know, that without getting into all the targets here, each of these particular cases, if you separate the conflict, have different gaps in knowledge that we constantly seek to close, and I don't want to do a net assessment in front of you. So depending on the question, performance is going to be plus or minus, but I think we did well. But
I wanted to give you an opportunity to answer yes, if you
yes.
gave me a
well,
qualified
I have
yes.
to be honest, because it's not perfect across the board while you're building capability and closing gaps. But
now I want to go, and I'm going to, with my limited time, I'm going to ask you three questions in one speech, and I hope you can remember each of them and answer each of them. But they have to deal with the last page of your testimony, in which you make 5 recommendations. And they relate to number 2, number 3, and number 4, which I may say editorially seem to me to be perfect beltway recommendations. The rhetoric is impressive, and the actual policy advice is practically zero, at least as far as I'm concerned.
well, I wrote them, sir,
The
so
second,
I appreciate that.
the second of those starts with that wonderful line: "We have created an important paradigm," which scares me at the beginning. But it has to do with the reorganization of the mission of fusing intelligence information, and speaks about the Counterterrorist Center and the creation of TTIC. So the portion of the question is, do you mean in this statement that we now have a very good structure for this fusion, and we simply need to perfect it personally in the way in which you answered a question to the chairman of the commission? Or do you think that the structure still needs to be changed in one respect or another? Now, I'm going to finish this because the light will go off. The third, your number 3 has to do with this relationship about which you've been asked previously between the DCI and the Secretary of Defense. And I'd like you to tell me just a little bit more about whether you feel that the present structure is a workable structure, really simply depending on the relationship between the DCI and the Secretary of Defense, or whether you think that there could significantly be structural changes there, but you just don't want to talk to them about them now because you're getting along pretty well with Rumsfeld and you want to be on the same page when you make such a recommendation. And then the fourth one really troubles me. In the fourth one, you say the DCI has to have an operational and analytical span of control that allows him or her to inform the president authoritatively about covert action and other very sensitive activities. Does that mean that prior to 9/11 or post 9/11, you do not believe that you could authoritatively advise the president about covert action and sensitive activities?
Let's work backwards. No, the answer, of course I did. I'm trying to say in a future model. What I don't want you to do is separate those functions from an individual.
Okay,
That's all I'm
so
trying to say to you.
just let it alone.
Yeah, don't create whatever structure you want. Just don't separate that span of control, because something will break. That's all I'm trying to tell you. With regard to the second one, yeah, the relationship is absolutely the essential component of what makes this work. The creationship of a structure at the Department of Defense that Don has put in place to build a tactical program and mesh it with a national program is quite substantive and important. And the other thing I'll say to you is nobody cares more about intelligence than this Secretary of Defense. Is it in large part a relationship issue? The answer is yes. Can you count on that relationship in the future? The answer is no. So you need to think about it in structural terms. The first question is, the structure is a good one because it's up and running, is going to mature, and you've got the right principles in place. Now we have to populate it and move it, but it's in the right place. The most important thing about its success is we need to make sure that the domestic data shows up. That's the most important thing, because Fusion, unless you have all the data in one place, you can't talk about competitive analysis, you can't talk about red teaming. It all has to be there. So the most important thing that has to happen is that architecture to ensure that the data shows up. And we need to keep pressure to make sure that happens. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of data and no left hand to meet the right hand.
Thank you. Those were all precise and enlightening answers.
One final question. Commissioner Benvenisti has asked and told me he can do it in 30 seconds.
I never said that. But I do have one question, Mr. Director. First, the Commission was provided with the SEBS, the Senior Intelligence, Executive Intelligence Brief. And I want to refer to the one of August 7, 2001. And I want to compare it to the PDBs, and particularly the PDB of August the 6th, 2001. Let me just tell you that the information in comparison has deleted from the SEB in the sentence, Al-Qaeda members, including some who are U.S. citizens, have resided or traveled to the U.S. for years, and the group apparently maintains a support structure. The words, that could aid in attacks, doesn't appear in the SEB, nor does the final 2 paragraphs of the PDB, which contain all of the updated and current information. Now, the Attorney General of the United States testified yesterday that he was out of the loop, did not receive the PDBs, but he did receive the SEB, as did other cabinet officials who have responsibility for law enforcement, such as Customs, INS, and so forth. Can you tell us who it was that makes the decision to send material on to the other executives who do not get the PDBs?
Commissioner, it's a little difficult to reconstruct all of that looking back, but in talking to people about it, a couple of factors on the table here. The SEB was a very new publication at that time. We were still developing the rules for how to do it. I think the first omission you mentioned, I'm guessing, was probably an editorial change by someone on the staff who was shortening the article for the SEB. The latter changes that you refer to, the rule that we were using at the time was that information we did not have written documentation for, which in this case, some of that information fell into that category because the analyst had gotten it on the phone from her FBI colleague. We didn't put in the SEB unless we had written documentation, and other information we didn't put in if it had an operational content, that is, there was an ongoing operational matter, as there was in the case of the call-in in Dubai, where we were aggressively following up trying to find this person. And those are essentially the reasons that we sometimes we will also not include information if there's a law enforcement dimension to it that could be affected by disseminating it widely. But a mix of reasons like that was behind it, and the decision is made in our Directorate of Intelligence where these publications are put together.